jungle on Tartarus 4 didn't just grow, it loomed. Each vine, fern, and tree seemed to share a silent, unwelcoming message. This world has it out for you. So, when Commander Xyler of the Klar Marines, an amphibious alien with too many eyes and not nearly enough patience, found himself face to face with a human, the moment could only be described as utterly bewildering. The Kevlar squad had been dispatched to rescue a research team that had crash-landed on Tartarus 4, a planet that, according to the Galactic Council's Do Not Visit guide, was notorious for its hostility, even in the weather. Xyler had scoffed at the description, dismissing it as an exaggeration, until he saw droplets of rain tear through his armor as though it were nothing more than paper. "Commander!" Rix, the squad's weapons specialist, rasped, using a rock as a makeshift shield to protect himself from the acid-like rain. "There's something wrong over there." He pointed at a clearing ahead, where a bizarre figure stood. Tall, lean, dressed in a mismatched uniform, with a rifle carelessly slung over one shoulder, the figure appeared to be eating something. "What in the voids is it doing?" Xyler hissed, narrowing his multiple eyes in confusion. "Eating, Trox," the medic said with a shrug, "something brown, probably toxic." The human looked up at them, sniffing the air like a predator. But instead of charging or shouting in alarm, the figure simply raised a hand in greeting and called out in a relaxed tone, "Hey, you guys lost?" Xyler's instincts screamed at him to retreat. Every nerve in his amphibious body told him to run, but orders demanded he engage. Cautiously, weapon ready, he stepped forward. "Identify yourself, creature," he commanded. The human blinked, cocked his head, and then grinned. "Name's Carter Malouin, research team mechanic. You're probably here to save me, but I'm gonna say it, bit late for that." The casual tone threw Xyler off entirely. The Kevlar Marines were known for their professionalism and precision, yet here was this human, chewing something that smelled faintly of acid, acting as if the dangers of Tartarus 4 were nothing more than an inconvenience. "We received distress signals," Xyler said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Where's the rest of your team?" Malouin waved his hand in a vague arc behind him. "Oh, they didn't make it. Swallowed by a sand vortex. Nasty stuff. But hey, look at the bright side. I'm still here." He took another bite of his snack. The Marines exchanged uneasy glances. Before Xyler could respond, a deafening roar tore through the jungle. From the shadows emerged a creature straight out of a nightmare. Its 6 legs were as large as hover cars, and its maw was lined with teeth capable of tearing through metal. It looked like the result of some twisted experiment between an octopus and a tank. "Ah, crap," Malouin muttered, tossing his snack aside. Xyler barely had time to order his squad into defensive formation before the creature charged. Plasma shots bounced harmlessly off its thick hide, and in one swift motion, its tail sent Rix flying into a nearby thorn bush. But what happened next was truly surreal. Malouin, the human, began to laugh. It wasn't the nervous chuckle of someone in over their head, nor was it the manic laugh of a crazed mind. It was the kind of laugh someone gives when they've forgotten their keys but suddenly realize they're already home. "This guy again?" Malouin said, slapping his forehead in mock exasperation. "Again?" Xyler screamed, dodging a falling tree. "Yeah, it's been stalking me for 3 days now," Malouin explained nonchalantly, pulling out his rifle. "It's got an attitude problem, but don't worry, I've got a system." Malouin's system turned out to involve tossing a small, smoking device directly into the creature's massive maw. The explosion was deafening, rattling the Marines' helmets, but when the smoke cleared, the creature was still standing, and angrier than ever. "Okay, Plan B," Malouin declared, breaking into a sprint toward the beast. "What's Plan B?" Xyler shouted, horrified, as Malouin jumped onto one of the creature's legs, climbing it like it was a tree. "I figure it out as I go," Malouin yelled back over his shoulder. For a brief moment, Xyler considered whether he was hallucinating. No sane being would behave this way, yet here was this human, scaling a terrifying predator and shouting insults at it. By the time the creature finally fell, thanks to a combination of Malouin's absurd antics and the Marine's gunfire, Xyler was left with more questions than answers. "Are all humans like you?" Xyler asked, completely dumbfounded. Malouin wiped green blood off his face and grinned. "Like me? Nah, I'm the boring one." For the first time in his life, Xyler found himself hoping that Malouin was telling the truth. "Yeah, it's been following me around for 3 days now," Malouin said, casually slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "It's got a bit of an attitude problem, but don't worry, I've got a plan." Malouin's plan turned out to involve tossing a small, smoking device directly into the creature's enormous mouth. The explosion that followed was loud enough to shake the Kevlar Marines' helmets, but when the smoke cleared, the creature was still standing, and now it was even angrier. "All right, time for Plan B," Malouin declared, sprinting straight for the beast. "What's Plan B?" Xyler shouted, horror creeping into his voice as he watched the human leap onto one of the creature's massive legs and begin climbing. timing. I'll figure it out as I go, Malouin called back, not even glancing over his shoulder. Zilkwa paused for a moment, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him. No rational being would act like this, yet here was this human, clinging to a deadly predator and shouting taunts at it. It took a combination of Malouin's bizarre tactics and the Marine's firepower to finally bring the creature down. But by the time it was subdued, Xyler was left with a growing pile of questions. Are all humans like you? He asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Malouin grinned, wiping blood and some green substance from his face. Like me? Nah, I'm the boring one. And for the first time in his career, Xyler found himself wishing that Malouin was being truthful. The inside of the Kavlar transport ship was a chaotic mess of flashing lights and oddly sticky surfaces, yet none of it seemed to faze Carter Malouin, who had made himself at home, sprawled out on what could only be described as a tactical beanbag chair. Commander Zilkwa paced back and forth in frustration, his movements quick and agitated. I need to clarify something, he began, his voice dripping with skepticism. You're telling me that your condition, bleeding from multiple wounds, likely concussed, possibly infected with Tartarian spores, is acceptable to you? Malouin raised an eyebrow, nonchalantly inspecting the jagged cut on his forearm. This? Nah, just a scratch. Got worse falling off a hovercycle back in Perth. Earth. It rhymes? Cute. Huh. Xyler's secondary eyes narrowed with suspicion, but before he could respond, Trox, the team medic, hurried into the room, holding a device that looked like a futuristic car battery with pincers. Commander, I've completed a scan of the human's vital signs, Trox said, and Xyler braced himself for the bad news he assumed was coming. Trox hesitated, his frills twitching in confusion. According to the data, he should be dead twice over. Malouin perked up. Really? Twice? I thought it'd be at least 3 times. Trox ignored him, continuing his report. The human's cardiovascular system is functioning at 13% capacity. His skeletal structure shows signs of microfractures, but they appear to be self-repairing. His body temperature is so high I initially mistook it for early-stage combustion. Malouin smirked. What can I say? We run hot. Xyler turned to Malouin, his voice a mix of awe and fear. Do all humans have, how should I put this, such preposterous biology? Malouin shrugged. Hey, some of us are just tougher. I just eat my greens and avoid doing anything stupid. You just rode a Deathworld predator like a hoverboard. Xyler snapped, finally losing his composure. Malouin waved him off with a careless gesture. Yeah, but I didn't fall off, did I? Before Xyler could respond, a loud, jarring alarm interrupted the conversation. The lights flickered and dimmed, replaced by a pulsating red glow that made everyone look like they were trapped inside a giant, furious lava lamp. Attention, barked Rix over the intercom. Unidentified hostile forces inbound. They're surrounding the ship. Xyler's fins stiffened. Hostile forces? On Tartarus 4, Malouin, lounging in his chair and chewing a piece of dried rations he'd scavenged from Trox's kit, shrugged. Sounds like someone really doesn't like your rescue mission. Did you guys tick off any intergalactic warlords lately? Xyler shot him a withering glare. We are the Kavlar Marines. Our mere presence is enough to unsettle lesser civilizations. Sure, Malouin said with a smirk, but you don't exactly scream subtle, you know? The ship suddenly shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance, except Malouin, who instinctively wrapped his arm around the nearest handle. He said, they're shooting. That's nice. Xyler rushed to the nearest terminal, barking orders to his team. Trox, prep the medical bay for casualties. Rix, get to the weapon systems. Someone get me a clear visual on our attackers. Malouin stood up and stretched, like he was preparing for a light jog. What's the plan, Commander? The plan, Xyler snapped, is for you to stay put and not make things worse. Malouin nodded thoughtfully. Solid plan, man. One small issue, though. He pointed at the far wall, now sporting a rapidly expanding hole, courtesy of what appeared to be a plasma drill. Breach! Rix shouted from somewhere down the corridor. Before Xyler could issue new orders, Malouin was already in motion. He grabbed a nearby toolbox, yanked out a metal rod, and, with a speed that defied reason, lunged toward the breach. What are you doing? Xyler bellowed, but Malouin didn't answer. The plasma drill retracted, revealing a squad of heavily armed insectoid mercenaries. Their leader, a hulking brute with mandibles the size of Xyler's arms, stepped forward, clearly expecting an easy victory. What he got instead was a faceful of improvised blunt force trauma, as Malouin swung the rod like a deranged croquet player. The mercenary staggered back, his antennae twitching in disbelief. What is that? He screeched in his native tongue. Malouin grinned, twirling the rod. That's called a human hello. Want the extended version? Behind him, Xyler groaned, already regretting every decision that had led him to this point. The medbay was its own kind of war zone, less from plasma fire or explosions, and more from utter chaos chaos and questionable hygiene. Trox was frantically trying to disinfect the room with something that smelled like burnt citrus, while Malouin sat on an examination table, grinning as he held what looked like a piece of alien bug armor, as though he had just won a lottery. "Explain this to me," Xyler demanded, storming into the room. "How is it that you, a mechanic, not only survived a close-quarters skirmish with professional mercenaries, but are also treating this like some kind of vacation?" Malouin glanced at the commander, then at Trox, who was holding a syringe-like device aimed at his neck. "First, I'd like to point out that I didn't just survive, I thrived. Second, I have no idea what that thing is, but if it stings, I'm biting back." Trox rolled his eye, an impressive feat considering he only had one. "This is a pain inhibitor. If you'd stop talking for a moment, I could inject it." "Don't bother," Malouin said, shrugging casually. "Pain's just a strong suggestion, and I'm feeling suggestive today." Xyler's frills flared, a clear indication of his growing frustration. "Your physiology is absurd. Your behavior is reckless, and your jokes are terrible. Do you even realize what you're dealing with?" Malouin raised the piece of alien bug armor like a trophy. "Yeah, these mercenaries. Big guys, mandibles, really bad breath." He sniffed the air. "Like really bad. Do they gargle swamp water or something?" "They are Gorian hunters," Xyler explained grimly. "Notorious assassins. Once they accept a contract, they pursue their target until they complete the job, no matter what." Malouin interrupted with a mischievous grin. "Until they succeed." Xyler's frustration peaked. "Which they will unless we neutralize them first. Why aren't you taking this seriously?" "Oh, I'm serious," Malouin replied, hopping off the table with a smirk. "Dead serious. But if you think panicking is going to solve this, you clearly haven't spent enough time on Earth." Trox made a sound somewhere between a cough and a groan. "We read about Earth, remember? Everything there is either lethal, insane, or on fire." Malouin nodded sagely. "And that's on a good day." The transport ship jolted suddenly, and the intercom crackled to life. Commander RX's voice buzzed through the speakers. "We've got another problem." "Define problem," Xyler growled. "The Gorthan are deploying boarding pods. Looks like round two's coming fast," Malouin said, perking up. "Oh sweet, I didn't even get to use half the fun stuff in my toolbox last time." Xyler ignored him, switching to a tactical tone. "TRS, secure the injured." "Malouin, stay out of the way." Malouin tilted his head, considering the request. "Define stay out of the way. It means do nothing," Xyler barked. Malouin snapped his fingers. Yeah, I'm probably not doing that." Xyler's fins twitched with barely contained rage as Malouin strolled toward the exit. "Where are you going?" "Look," Malouin said over his shoulder, "I get that you're in charge, but if these guys want another round, I'm not going to disappoint them. Got to maintain my reputation." "What reputation?" Xyler yelled, but Malouin was already gone. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos and disbelief as the boarding pods slammed into the ship. The Gorthan hunters poured in, their heavy footfalls echoing through the corridors. The Cavalier Marines braced for a desperate last stand. Then, from the adjacent corridor, came the unmistakable sound of gleeful destruction. When Xyler arrived at the scene, he found Malouin wielding what appeared to be an industrial-grade nail gun. His face was lit with the sheer joy of improvised combat, and around him lay an alarming number of incapacitated hunters. "You're welcome," Malouin called, firing another nail into one of the alien's mandibles. "Pro tip, aim for the legs. They fall like drunk toddlers." Rick staggered in, eyes wide with disbelief. "Commander, he's..." "Stop trying to make sense of it," Xyler bellowed, exasperated. Malouin tossed the nail gun aside, pulled out a crowbar, and smashed it into another Gorthan, still grinning. "See, the trick is to never let them know what you're about to do next." "What's your next move?" Rix asked weakly, his voice strained. Malouin didn't even glance back. "I don't know yet. Isn't it fun?" As the last Gorthan crumpled to the floor, Xyler stood frozen, staring at the destruction. His mind spun in a whirlpool of confusion. "Are all humans this chaotic?" Malouin flashed him a lopsided grin. "Nah, I'm one of the nice ones." TRS, stepping into the room with a medical scanner, muttered, "If this is nice, I don't want to meet the others." The aftermath of Malouin's antics left the Cavalier Marines in a state of bewilderment that could only be described as existential confusion. Xyler stood amidst the wreckage, staring at what was once a pristine hallway. The walls were dented, wiring dangled like synthetic spaghetti, and a faint smell of burnt chitin lingered in the air. "This isn't a ship anymore," Xyler muttered, shaking his head. "It's a Malouin zone." "Glad you like it," Malouin said, stepping over a twitching Gorthan and casually cracking open a canister that emitted the unmistakable scent of fermented despair. He took a long swig and sighed. "Nothing like warm root beer after a fight. Want some?" Xyler's frills twitched in disgust. "I want peace and order, neither of which exists when you're involved." laughed. Malouin shrugged. Chaos is underrated. Keeps life spicy. The ship lurched again, followed by an alarming siren. Trox's voice crackled through the intercom. Commander, the hunters didn't just board. They've planted a destabilizer in the engine core. We've got less than 10 minutes before this ship disintegrates. Zyler's eyes widened in panic. Trox, can you disarm it? Not a chance, Trox responded frantically. It's rigged to detonate if tampered with. We need to evacuate now. Malouin, casually leaning against the wall and chewing on what looked like a suspicious energy bar, said, we could defuse it. Zyler turned on him, disbelief in his voice. It's a hunter destabilizer. They're made to be impossible to defuse. Malouin flashed a grin. But they're not designed for me. The engine room was a claustrophobic maze of hissing pipes, sparking wires, and general unpleasantness. At the center, a glowing, pulsating device the size of a small refrigerator hummed ominously, practically daring anyone to touch it. Trox pointed to the device from a safe distance. That's the destabilizer. One wrong move and we're vaporized. Malouin crouched beside it, pulling tools from a bag that looked as though it had survived at least 3 centuries. Relax. I've diffused worse things than this on Earth. Trox raised an eyebrow skeptically. Like what? In a pub fight on Titan, Malouin replied, his tone casual. Long story. Zyler pinched the bridge of his sensory ridge, a reflex he had developed after approximately 5 Malouin-related incidents. You're not qualified for this. Sure I am, Malouin said, poking at the device with a screwdriver. I've got hands, and it's not blowing up yet, so I'm ahead of the game. Trox whimpered in the background. Zyler muttered a prayer to whatever deities tolerated Marines, watching Malouin hum a carefree tune as he continued to work. After a tense 5 minutes, Malouin finally paused, wiping sweat from his brow. Meanwhile, Malouin worked at a pace that was nothing short of alarming. Wires were tied, circuits connected, and he muttered phrases like, just needs a little more juice, and I really hope this doesn't blow up immediately. Are you sure this plan will work? Zyler asked, trying his best not to sound like he was already composing his last will and testament. Define, sure, Malouin said, not looking up from his work. Certain, Zyler barked. Malouin shrugged. Oh well, definitely not. But hey, what's life without a little risk? The commander's fins twitched in frustration. You are incapable of taking anything seriously. Malouin paused for a moment, an unusually thoughtful expression on his face. That's not true. I take breakfast very seriously. Everything else? Meh. The bridge shook as the ravenous claw fired a warning shot, the plasma beam slicing past the transport ship by mere meters. Time's up, Rix shouted. They're targeting the engines. Not for long, Malouin replied, standing up and holding what could only be described as a Frankenstein's monster of wires, tape, and questionable engineering. Okay, here's the deal, Malouin continued. This little bad boy is going to emit a short-range EMP burst that'll fry their shields. But there's a catch. Of course there's a catch, Trox muttered. Malouin grinned. I have to manually launch it from outside the ship. Zyler stared at him, wide-eyed. You'll be exposed to the vacuum of space. That's suicide. Malouin gave a lazy salute. Relax, I've got duct tape. What could go wrong? Minutes later, Malouin stood in the ship's airlock, clad in a hastily thrown-together space suit that screamed bare minimum effort. The device was strapped to his back, and his helmet sported a cheerful sticker that read, "Have a nice day. Ready?" Zyler asked over the comms, his voice a mix of disbelief and resignation. Born ready, Malouin replied, slapping the airlock controls. The door hissed open, and Malouin was thrust into the void with the grace of a catapulted potato. As he soared toward the ravenous claw, he hummed a carefree tune to himself, blissfully unaware that any rational being would be paralyzed with terror. The dreadnought loomed closer, its shield a shimmering wall of light, impenetrable and foreboding. Almost there, Malouin muttered, adjusting his trajectory with a quick burst from his suit's thrusters. Just a little closer. Behind him, the Kavlar crew watched in stunned silence as Malouin approached the enemy ship, looking as though he had not a care in the universe. What if he doesn't make it? Trox asked nervously. Zyler sighed, watching in dread. Then at least the chaos dies with him. But Malouin did make it. With one final thrust, he landed on the hull of the ravenous claw, his magnetized boots locking him into place. He quickly attached the device to a vulnerable section of the shield generator, all while humming a tune. All right, big guy, he said, patting the device. Do your thing. He flipped the switch and launched himself back toward the Kavlar ship just as the EMP burst erupted. The shields surrounding the ravenous claw flickered, dimmed, and finally collapsed. Shields are down, Rix shouted. Zyler Xyler wasted no time. Fire everything we have. The Kavlar ship unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds, each one striking the exposed dreadnought with deadly precision. Within moments, the ravenous claw exploded in a fiery blast, its debris scattering across the void. Back on the Kavlar ship, Malouin strolled onto the bridge, peeling off his helmet with an easy grin. "Told you it'd work," he said. Xyler stared at him, his frills twitching in exasperation. "You're a madman." "Maybe," Malouin replied, grinning wider, "but I'm a madman with results." And for the first time, Xyler couldn't bring himself to argue with that.